Jake Morrison sat in the briefing room staring at the holographic display in front of him. He had been called to headquarters without explanation, pulled away from his duties aboard the exploration ship Horizon's Edge. Now, 3 admirals sat across from him with serious faces, and Jake knew his life was about to change. Admiral Carter spoke first. His voice was calm but heavy with meaning. "Lieutenant Morrison, what we're about to discuss is classified at the highest level. You cannot speak of this to anyone until we give you permission." Jake nodded slowly. His heart was already beating faster. In his 3 years of service, he had faced dangerous missions and first contact situations, but something about this meeting felt different. Worse. "We've been negotiating with the Valthrian Empire for 8 months, Carter continued. "They control access to the Kepler sector, which contains resources we desperately need. Without those resources, Earth and her colonies will face severe shortages within 5 years. Millions could die." Jake listened carefully. Everyone in the fleet knew about the Valthrian situation. The negotiations had been all over the news for months, but progress had been slow. The Valthrians were an ancient and powerful species who didn't trust easily. Admiral Chen leaned forward. "The Valthrian Empress has made a final offer. She will grant us access to the Kepler sector and establish a full alliance with Earth. But she has one condition." The pause that followed made Jake's stomach twist. "She wants a human to marry her daughter," Chen said. "It's a Valthrian custom, something they do to create permanent bonds between royal families and new allies. The marriage would be real and legally binding under both our laws and theirs." Jake felt his blood run cold. He looked from one admiral to another, hoping this was some kind of test or simulation, but their expressions remained serious. "Why are you telling me this?" Jake asked, though part of him already knew the answer. Carter pulled up Jake's file on the holographic display. "We've reviewed every officer in the fleet. We needed someone young, adaptable, and without strong family ties that would make this assignment too painful. Someone with excellent diplomatic instincts and a clean psychological profile. Your name came up at the top of every list." "You want me to marry an alien?" Jake said flatly. "For a treaty." "We're asking you to consider it," Admiral Chen said. "We won't force you, but we need you to understand what's at stake. If this alliance fails, the resource crisis will hit Earth's outer colonies first. The projected death toll is in the millions within a decade." Jake felt sick. He thought about the colonists he had met during his service, families trying to build new lives on distant worlds. He thought about his own sister Kelly and her 2 kids living on Europa Station. They would be among the first to suffer if the shortages began. What about the Valthrian? The daughter? Does she want this? Jake asked. "Ambassador Vena has agreed to her mother's wishes," Carter said. "She understands duty. Like you, she's putting her people first." "How old is she?" 63 in Earth years, Admiral Chen answered. "But Valthrians age differently than humans. She's considered to be in her prime, equivalent to someone in their early 30s by our standards. She'll likely live another 200 years. Jake's mind was racing. He was 28 years old. He had imagined getting married someday, maybe after he retired from the service. He had pictured meeting someone naturally, falling in love the normal way. Not this. Never this. "Can I think about it?" Jake asked. "You have 24 hours, Carter said. "The Empress won't wait longer than that. If you decline, we'll move to the next candidate. But Lieutenant Morrison, I want to be honest with you. No one else on our list is as suitable as you are. You have the best chance of making this work." Jake left the briefing room in a daze. He walked through the space station's corridors without really seeing them. Other officers passed by, going about their normal duties, completely unaware that one of their own was being asked to sacrifice his entire future for politics. He found himself in the observation deck, staring out at Earth hanging in the darkness of space. It looked so peaceful from here, so beautiful, but he knew the reality. Resources were running low, tensions were rising. Without the Valthrian alliance, everything could fall apart. Jake called his sister Kelly on a secure channel. He couldn't tell her everything, but he needed to hear her voice. "Jake, this is a surprise," Kelly said, her face appearing on his communication device. Behind her, he could see his nephew and niece playing. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah, I just wanted to check in. Jake said, forcing a smile. How are the kids? They talked for 20 minutes about normal things. School, work, the neighbor's annoying dog. Normal life continued for Kelly and her family, completely unaware of the crisis looming over them. When Jake ended the call, he had made his decision. He returned to Admiral Carter's office before the 24 hours were up. I'll do it, Jake said. I'll marry her. Carter stood and shook his hand. You're saving millions of lives, Lieutenant. History will remember what you've done here. Jake doubted that. History would remember the alliance, not the young officer who gave up his freedom to make it happen. But that didn't matter. What mattered was keeping people safe. The next week passed in a blur of briefings and preparations. Jake learned everything he could about Valthrian culture. He studied their language, though he was told Vena spoke perfect English. He learned about their customs, their history, their biology. The telepathic bond that would form during the marriage ceremony was explained to him in clinical terms, but nothing could prepare him for what it would actually feel like to have someone else constantly present in his mind. Finally, the day arrived. Jake was transported to the Valthrian diplomatic station in neutral space. The station was enormous, built in the elegant style of Valthrian architecture with flowing curves and crystal structures that seemed to glow from within. He was taken to a preparation room where Valthrian attendants dressed him in ceremonial clothes, a blend of human and Valthrian styles. The fabric felt strange against his skin, lighter than anything made on Earth. Then they brought him to the ceremony hall. The room was filled with dignitaries from both species. Cameras recorded everything, broadcasting the event across both empires. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a historic moment, the joining of two civilizations. And then he saw Vena. She stood at the other end of the hall, and Jake's first thought was that she was completely alien. She towered over him at 7 feet tall. Her skin was a deep blue color that seemed to shimmer in the light. Her eyes were silver, without visible pupils, and her hair moved around her head as if floating in water. She wore robes of deep purple that marked her royal status. Their eyes met across the distance, and Jake saw his own resignation reflected back at him. She didn't want this either. That much was clear from her expression. They approached each other slowly, meeting in the center of the hall. Up close, Jake could see that despite her alien features, Vena was beautiful in her own way. But beauty didn't matter. This wasn't about attraction or love. This was about duty. The Valthrian priest began the ceremony, speaking in a language Jake had learned but still struggled to follow. Vena translated in a low voice. Her words meant only for him. We pledge ourselves to each other, she said, not just in body but in mind and spirit. We become one unit, one purpose, one bond. Jake repeated the words he had memorized, stumbling slightly over the pronunciation. Vena's expression remained neutral, but he thought he saw a flicker of something in her silver eyes, sympathy perhaps, or pity. Then came the bonding ritual. Vena placed her long fingers on either side of Jake's head. Her touch was warm, almost hot. Jake felt a sudden pressure in his mind, as if someone was opening a door he didn't know existed. This may feel uncomfortable, Vena whispered. I apologize. Then the connection formed and Jake gasped. He could feel Vena in his head, her presence like a second heartbeat. Emotions that weren't his own flooded through him. Resignation, duty, loneliness. And underneath it all, a deep sadness that made his chest ache. The ceremony concluded. The priest declared them married under both Valthrian and Earth law. The crowd applauded politely. Cameras captured the moment for history, but Jake barely noticed any of it. All he could focus on was the strange new presence in his mind, the constant awareness that he was no longer alone inside his own head. Vena pulled her hands away, and the intensity of the connection lessened slightly, but it didn't disappear. It would never disappear. They were bound now, for life. We should greet our guests, Vena said formally, her voice quiet enough that only he could hear. Then we can retire to our quarters. Our quarters. The words hit Jake like a physical blow. This was real. This was his life now. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak, and followed Vena into his new future. The quarters they were assigned were spacious by station standards, with separate sleeping areas connected by a shared living space. Jake stood in the doorway, taking it all in. The furniture was a mix of human and Valthrian designs, an attempt to make both of them feel at home. It failed completely. Vena moved to one side of the room and began removing her ceremonial jewelry. She moved with practiced grace, each motion precise and controlled. Jake realized he could feel her exhaustion through their mental bond, a dull ache that sat behind his own feelings. "You can take the sleeping chamber on the left," Vena said without looking at him. "It has been prepared according to human needs. Temperature, humidity, lighting, all adjusted to your preferences." "Thank you," Jake said quietly. Vena finally turned to face him. Her silver eyes studied him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "We should establish some boundaries. The mental bond cannot be severed, but we can learn to shield our thoughts from each other. I will teach you how. It will give us both some privacy." "I would appreciate that," Jake admitted. Having someone else constantly present in his mind was already driving him crazy. He could feel her emotions like background noise, and worse, he knew she could feel his. "I did not ask for this marriage," Vena said suddenly. Her voice was flat, empty of emotion, but through the bond, Jake felt her bitterness. "But my mother commands and I obey. That is the way of my people." "I didn't ask for it either," Jake replied. "But here we are." They stood in silence for a long moment. The weight of their situation hung between them like a physical thing. Finally, Vena moved toward her sleeping chamber. "We have a diplomatic breakfast tomorrow morning with the Terran Council," she said. "Someone will wake you at 6 station time. Try to rest." She disappeared into her room and the door closed behind her. Jake was left alone in the shared living space, more isolated than he had ever felt in his life. The first week was terrible. Jake and Vena maintained a careful distance from each other. They attended required diplomatic functions together, presenting a united front to the galaxy. But the moment they returned to their quarters, they retreated to separate corners. They spoke only when necessary, brief exchanges about schedules and obligations. The mental bond made everything worse. Jake could feel Vena's discomfort whenever he was near. She could sense his homesickness and resentment. They were trapped in a cycle of mutual misery, neither able to escape the other's negative emotions. Jake spent his free time studying or exercising, anything to keep his mind occupied. Vena worked constantly, reviewing diplomatic reports and preparing for endless meetings. They were like two strangers forced to share a small space, both desperately wishing they were anywhere else. But slowly, things began to shift. It started with small observations. Jake noticed that Vena barely ate during their formal dinners. Through their bond, he could feel her hunger, but she maintained perfect composure in public. He realized she found most human food unappetizing but was too polite to say anything. One evening, after another dinner where Vena had barely touched her plate, Jake stopped by the station's alien quarter and found a Valthrian food vendor. He didn't know what to order, so he simply explained the situation. The vendor, an elderly Valthrian named Corva, smiled and prepared a traditional dish. When Jake brought it back to their quarters, Vena was bent over her workstation, reviewing documents. She looked up in surprise when he entered. "I brought you something," Jake said, holding out the container. "The vendor said it's a traditional evening meal. I don't know if you like it, but I noticed you haven't been eating much." Vena stared at him for a long moment. Through their bond, Jake felt her surprise shift into something softer, warmer. She took the container and opened it. The smell that emerged was strange to Jake, spicy and sharp, but Vena's expression transformed. "You brought me ricta soup," she said quietly. "This is comfort food from my childhood." "How did you know?" "I didn't," Jake admitted. "I just knew you were hungry." Vena looked at him with those silver eyes, and for the first time, Jake didn't see coldness there. "Thank you, Jake. This was kind." It was such a small thing, but it changed something between them. The next morning, Jake found that Vena had adjusted the temperature in his sleeping chamber to be slightly cooler, the way he preferred it. He hadn't mentioned it to her, but she had noticed his discomfort through their bond and fixed it. The real turning point came 2 weeks later, at a diplomatic dinner with representatives from the Kryn Confederacy. The Kryn were reptilian, cold-blooded, and known for their aggressive negotiation tactics. Their ambassador, Seseth, was particularly notorious for his rudeness. Jake and Vena sat at the long table, surrounded by diplomats from a dozen different species. The dinner had been tense from the start, with Seseth making barely veiled insults about the human-Valthrian alliance. "Tell me, Ambassador Vena," Seseth said, his forked tongue flickering between his teeth. "How does it feel to be bound to such a fragile creature? Humans are so weak, so short-lived. Your mother must have been desperate to accept such terms." Jake felt anger rise in his chest, but before he could respond, something else flooded through the mental bond. Vena's fury, hot and fierce, overwhelmed everything else. She stood so quickly her chair scraped against the floor. "You dare?" Vena's voice was cold as ice but sharp as a blade. "You sit at this table because we allow it, Seseth. You speak only because we grant you the privilege. And you use that privilege to insult my husband?" The entire room fell silent. Every eye turned to watch. "Jake Morrison gave up his freedom for peace between our peoples," Vena continued. Her silver eyes blazed with anger. "He sacrificed his future, his choices, his life, so that billions could live in security. He has more courage in his smallest finger than you possess in your entire genetic line. You are not worthy to speak his name, much less insult him in my presence." Seseth's scales flushed darker, a sign of embarrassment in Kryn physiology. He stammered something that might have been an apology, but Vena had already turned away from him. She looked at Jake, and through their bond, he felt the truth of everything she had said. She believed it. Every word. The dinner ended shortly after. As they walked back to their quarters through the station's corridors, neither of them spoke. But the silence felt different now. Comfortable, almost companionable. Inside their quarters, Vena finally broke the silence. "I apologize if I overstepped. I should have let you defend yourself." Jake shook his head. "No, I should thank you. What you said back there, did you mean it?" "Every word," Vena said simply. "You have been nothing but honorable in this situation, Jake. Even when you have every right to be angry, to resent me and my people, you remain professional and kind. That deserves respect." "You've been honorable too," Jake said. "Neither of us wanted this, but you've never taken that out on me. You've been fair and patient even when I know you feel as trapped as I do." Vena sat down on one of the couches, and after a moment's hesitation, Jake sat beside her, not close but closer than they had been before. "Perhaps we have been approaching this situation incorrectly," Vena said thoughtfully. "We are allies, are we not? Partners forced together by circumstance, but partners nonetheless. Why should we act as enemies?" "You're right," Jake agreed. "We're stuck with each other, probably for the rest of my life. We might as well try to make it bearable." "Bearable," Vena repeated, and Jake caught a hint of amusement through their bond. A low bar, but a start. That night they talked for hours. Really talked for the first time since their wedding. Vena told him about growing up in the Valthrian imperial court, about the constant pressure to be perfect, to represent her people with dignity. She talked about her love of music and art, things she rarely had time for anymore. Jake shared stories about Earth, about growing up in Colorado with mountains and forests. He told her about his sister Kelly and her kids, about why he had joined the space service in the first place. He had wanted to explore, to see new things, to make a difference. He just hadn't expected it to happen like this. "Do you regret it?" Vena asked suddenly. "Agreeing to this marriage?" Jake considered the question carefully. Through their bond, Vena would know if he lied. "I regret having the choice taken from me. I regret that we were both forced into this by politics and necessity. But do I regret you specifically? No. You've been better than I had any right to expect." Vena's expression softened. "I feel the same. When my mother first told me about this arrangement, I was furious. I imagined being bound to someone crude, someone who would not understand or respect my culture. But you have tried, Jake. You have made an effort to learn about my people, to understand our ways. That matters to me. So where do we go from here?" Jake asked. "Forward," Vena said simply. "Together. Not as strangers sharing quarters, but as true partners. If we must be bound for life, let us at least be friends." Jake offered his hand, a human gesture of agreement. Vena looked at it for a moment, then reached out and took it. Her skin was warm, almost hot compared to his. Through their bond, he felt her determination mixing with his own. "Friends," Jake agreed. It wasn't love. It wasn't even romance, but it was something real. Something they had chosen for themselves despite everything. The change between Jake and Vena didn't happen overnight. But once it began, it transformed everything. Their quarters stopped feeling like a prison and started feeling like a home. Mornings became their favorite time. Jake would wake early and make coffee, a human drink Vena had initially found strange but had grown to love. She would prepare a Valthrian tea that smelled like flowers and tasted like spiced honey. They would sit together in the shared living space, discussing the day ahead and whatever news had come in overnight. "The Altarian Trade League wants to meet with us next week," Vena said one morning, scrolling through her messages. "They're interested in establishing a trade route through Valthrian space." "That could be good for everyone," Jake replied, sipping his coffee. "The Altarians have resources Earth needs, and they've been looking for reliable partners. If we can facilitate that connection, it strengthens our whole alliance network." Vena glanced at him with approval. "You're thinking like a diplomat now. When you first arrived, you only saw the military angles." "I had a good teacher," Jake said, and through their bond he felt Vena's pleasure at the compliment. The mental bond between them had evolved too. In the beginning it had been intrusive and uncomfortable, a constant reminder of their forced connection. But now they used it to communicate in ways that words couldn't match. During diplomatic meetings, they could coordinate strategy silently, sharing thoughts and reactions instantly. Vena taught Jake meditation techniques that helped him control what emotions bled through the bond. Jake showed Vena human breathing exercises that helped with stress. They learned each other's rhythms, their patterns, their needs. One evening, Jake came back to their quarters to find Vena sitting in the dark, her head in her hands. Through their bond, he felt her pain before he even asked what was wrong. "Headache?" he asked gently. "A severe one," Vena admitted. "It happens sometimes. A side effect of maintaining telepathic shields all day during negotiations. It will pass." Jake remembered something from his cultural studies. Valthrians could ease each other's pain through touch, a gentler use of their telepathic abilities. "Can I help?" Vena looked at him with surprise. "You've been reading about Valthrian healing practices?" "I've been reading about everything Valthrian," Jake said. "Just tell me what to do." She guided his hands to her temples, showing him the right pressure points. Jake had never done anything like this before, but through their bond he could sense what she needed. He applied steady pressure, and slowly he felt her pain begin to ease. "Thank you," Vena whispered. "No human has ever done this for a Valthrian before. I didn't think it would work without telepathic ability." "Maybe our bond makes it possible," Jake suggested. "We're connected in ways no human and Valthrian have been before." Vena reached up and placed her hand over his. "We are, aren't we?" Something new. Something unexpected. The moment stretched between them, charged with something Jake couldn't quite name. Then Vena's communication device chirped with an incoming message, breaking the spell. But something had shifted between them again. Something deeper than friendship. Their effectiveness as a diplomatic team grew stronger every day. During negotiations with the Altarian Trade League, they worked in perfect harmony. Jake's human directness balanced Vena's Valthrian formality. When the Altarians tried to push for unfair terms, Jake and Vena countered as one unit, anticipating each other's arguments and building on each other's points. "How do they do that?" one of the Altarian delegates asked during a break. "They move like one person with two bodies." "They're bonded," another delegate replied. "Haven't you heard? It's the human Valthrian marriage that everyone's talking about. They say the bond between them is unlike anything seen before." Jake overheard the conversation and felt Vena's amusement through their connection. She had heard it too. "Let them wonder," Vena said silently through their bond, a skill they had developed recently. "It gives us an advantage if they think we're mysterious." Jake grinned. "Devious. I like it." But it wasn't just their professional relationship that was growing. They had started sharing leisure time as well. Vena introduced Jake to Valthrian music, complex compositions that used harmonics human ears weren't designed to fully appreciate. But Jake loved watching Vena listen to it, seeing her usually controlled expression soften with emotion. Jake showed Vena human movies, explaining cultural context when she didn't understand certain references. They watched comedies, and Jake discovered that Vena had a sharp sense of humor once she relaxed enough to show it. Her laugh was like wind chimes, bright and clear, and Jake found himself trying to make her laugh just to hear that sound. One night, they were watching an old Earth movie about a man learning to dance. During a particularly energetic scene, Vena asked, "Do you know how to do this? This human dancing?" I'm terrible at it, Jake admitted. My sister tried to teach me before I left for the academy, but I have 2 left feet. Show me, Vena said, standing up. What? No, I told you I'm bad at it. I'm curious, Vena insisted, and through their bond, Jake felt her genuine interest. Please? Jake sighed but stood up. Okay, but don't say I didn't warn you. He pulled up some music on his device, a simple rhythm, and started to demonstrate basic steps. He was right about being bad at it, stumbling over his own feet within seconds. But then Vena stood and moved beside him, mimicking his movements with her natural grace. Even doing it wrong, she made it look elegant. They tried to dance together, but their height difference made it awkward. Vena was nearly a foot taller than Jake, and their attempts at partner dancing ended with both of them laughing. We're terrible at this, Jake said, still laughing. We truly are, Vena agreed, her silver eyes bright with amusement. But I enjoyed it. She was standing close to him now, closer than she had ever been outside of formal requirements. Through their bond, Jake felt something from her that made his breath catch. Affection, real, genuine affection, and something else, something warmer that made his heart race. Jake looked up at her, and Vena looked down at him, and the moment stretched between them like a thread pulled tight. Jake, Vena said softly, I need to tell you something. What is it? When this marriage was first arranged, I thought it would be a burden I would carry for the rest of your natural life. I thought I would spend decades bound to someone I respected but could never truly connect with. She paused, and Jake felt her gathering courage through their bond. I was wrong. This past month with you has been the happiest time I've had in years. You make me laugh. You challenge me intellectually. You've learned my culture and respected my boundaries. And somewhere along the way you stopped being an obligation and became someone I choose to be with. Jake's throat felt tight. Vena, I feel the same way. I was so angry at first, so resentful. But you've been patient and kind and funny when I least expected it. You're the best friend I've ever had. And lately I've been feeling something more than friendship. Something I never thought would happen between us. What do we do about it? Vena asked quietly. I don't know, Jake admitted. This wasn't supposed to happen. We weren't supposed to actually care about each other. But we do, Vena said. I care about you, Jake Morrison. More than I thought possible. Jake reached up and took her hand. Through their bond, emotions flowed between them, honest and raw. Affection, respect, and the first stirrings of something deeper. Neither of them was quite ready to call it love, but it was heading in that direction. We don't have to rush this, Jake said. We have time. But I want you to know that when I look at you now, I don't see the alien I was forced to marry. I see someone I'm choosing to care about. Someone I want in my life, bond or no bond. Vena squeezed his hand gently. I choose you too, Jake. Every day I choose you. They stood there for a long moment, hands clasped, the mental bond between them singing with shared emotion. Then Vena leaned down and pressed her forehead to Jake's, a Valthrian gesture of deep affection and trust. We're going to be okay, she whispered. Together we're going to be better than okay. Jake closed his eyes and let himself feel everything through their bond. The warmth, the connection, the promise of something real growing between them. Yeah, he agreed. We are. Later that night, lying in his sleeping chamber, Jake thought about how much had changed in just a few weeks. He had gone from viewing this marriage as a life sentence to seeing it as an opportunity. Vena wasn't his jailer. She was his partner, his friend, and maybe eventually something more. Through the walls, he could feel Vena in her own chamber, her presence in his mind as familiar as his own heartbeat. He sent a gentle pulse of affection through their bond, a silent good night. A moment later, she sent one back, warm and content. For the first time since arriving at the Valthrian station, Jake fell asleep with a smile on his face, looking forward to tomorrow and whatever it would bring. Because tomorrow he would wake up and see Vena again, and that had become something he genuinely wanted. 3 months into their marriage, Jake and Vena had become something neither of them expected. They were partners in every sense of the word. Their diplomatic work was going well, their personal relationship was growing stronger every day, and life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Then the Vraxin incident happened, and everything changed. Jake and Vena were attending a diplomatic conference on the neutral trade station Unity Point. The conference brought together representatives from 20 different species to discuss trade, routes, and resource sharing. It was supposed to be routine, a few days of boring meetings and formal dinners. On the second day, While Jake and Vena were reviewing notes in their temporary quarters, the station's alarms began to blare. "What's happening?" Jake asked, moving to the window. Outside, he could see ships approaching the station, their hulls marked with the red and black insignia of the Vraxan military. Vena's eyes went distant, her telepathic abilities reaching out. Her expression turned grim. "The Vraxans are attacking. They've taken control of the conference hall. All the delegates are trapped inside as hostages." Jake felt his military training kick in immediately. "We need to contact the nearest military outpost, get help here as fast as possible." "That will take hours," Vena said. "The delegates don't have hours. The Vraxans are demanding that their territorial claims be recognized. If their demands aren't met within 2 hours, they'll start executing hostages." Jake grabbed his communication device and started pulling up schematics of the station. "Then we don't have time to wait for help? How many Vraxan soldiers are on the station?" 12 that I can sense telepathically," Vena replied. "But Jake, what are you thinking? We're diplomats, not soldiers." "I used to be a soldier," Jake said, his mind already working through possibilities. "Before I joined the diplomatic corps, I did 3 years of tactical training. I know how to handle situations like this." Vena moved beside him, looking at the schematics he had pulled up. Through their bond, he felt her concern for him mixing with determination. "If you're going in there, I'm coming with you. My telepathic abilities can tell us where the hostages and guards are. We can coordinate through our mental bond without the Vraxans hearing our communications." Jake wanted to argue, to tell her to stay safe, but he knew she was right. Together, they had a better chance of pulling this off. Alone, he would be going in blind. "Okay," Jake agreed. "But we do this smart, no unnecessary risks." They gathered what they could from their quarters. Jake found a maintenance uniform that would help him blend in. Vena's natural telepathic shielding made her almost invisible to the Vraxans' basic scanning equipment. Together, they made their way through the station's service corridors. Through their bond, Jake and Vena communicated silently as they moved. Vena would sense where the Vraxan guards were stationed and guide Jake around them, when they had no choice but to confront a guard. Jake used tactics he had learned in the military, disabling them quietly and efficiently. 2 guards ahead at the junction. Vena's voice came through their bond. "They're watching the main corridor. Can you distract them telepathically?" Jake asked silently. "I can create a minor illusion, make them think they hear something down the left corridor, but I can only hold it for a few seconds. That's all I need." Vena's eyes glowed slightly as she focused her telepathic power. The guards suddenly turned toward the left corridor, moving to investigate a sound only they could hear. Jake moved quickly, coming up behind them and using pressure points to render them unconscious before they could raise an alarm. "That's 4 down," Jake thought through their bond. 8 more to go. They continued through the station, working in perfect synchronization. Every move Jake made was coordinated with Vena's telepathic senses. She could feel the location of every Vraxan on the station, could sense the fear of the hostages trapped in the conference hall. Through their bond, they shared information faster than any communication device could transmit. When they reached the conference hall, they found 4 Vraxan guards stationed at the main entrance. The doors were sealed, and through the windows they could see the hostages sitting on the floor, guarded by more Vraxans inside. 4 outside, 4 inside, Vena confirmed. "The leader is demanding to speak with someone from the Galactic Council. He's getting impatient." Jake studied the situation. A direct assault would get hostages killed. They needed to be smarter than that. "Can you create a bigger distraction? Something that would draw the guards away from the door?" "I could trigger a false emergency alert in another section of the station," Vena said. "Make them think there's a hull breach. But Jake, that would leave me vulnerable. Maintaining an illusion that complex takes all my focus. I won't be able to shield myself or fight." "Then I'll protect you," Jake said firmly. Through their bond, he sent her a pulse of absolute certainty. "We're partners. I've got your back." Vena's silver eyes met his, and through their bond, Jake felt her trust in him, complete and unwavering. "Okay, on your signal." Jake positioned himself where he could see both the main entrance and the corridor beyond. Vena stood beside him, her eyes beginning to glow as she gathered her telepathic power. "Now," Jake said. Alarms began blaring in a distant section of the station. The Vraxan guards looked at each other in confusion. Then 3 of them ran toward the false emergency, leaving only 1 at the door. Jake moved fast, taking down the remaining guard before he could react. Then he was at the door controls. Overriding the lock with codes he had memorized from the station schematics, the door opened and chaos erupted inside. The Vraxan guards inside shouted in alarm and raised their weapons, but Jake was already moving, using the hostages' positions as cover, taking down one guard and then another. Vena, despite her exhaustion from maintaining the false alarm, used her remaining telepathic strength to confuse the remaining guards, making them see multiple Jakes attacking from different directions. But then one of the Vraxans got lucky. His weapon discharged wildly, and Jake felt a burning pain tear through his side. He stumbled, his vision blurring. Through their bond, Vena felt his pain as if it were her own. She screamed his name, not through their mental connection but aloud, with a desperation that silenced the entire room. The last two Vraxan guards turned toward her, but they had made a mistake. They had hurt someone Vena cared about, and a Valthrian protecting their bonded mate was not something to take lightly. Vena's eyes blazed with silver light, and she unleashed her full telepathic power. The Vraxans collapsed, overwhelmed by the mental assault. It was more force than she should have used. More than was strictly necessary, but Jake was hurt, and nothing else mattered to her in that moment. The hostages stared in shock as Vena ran to Jake, dropping to her knees beside him. Her hands pressed against his wound, and her healing abilities flowed through their bond, knitting tissue and stopping the bleeding. "Don't you dare," Vena said, tears streaming down her face. "Don't you dare leave me, Jake Morrison." Jake managed a weak smile. "Not planning on it. We're partners, remember?" Security forces finally arrived, having responded to the real alarms triggered by the Vraxan attack. They secured the remaining Vraxans and began helping the hostages. But no one could look away from Jake and Vena. The entire scene had been broadcast through the conference hall security cameras, streamed live to news networks across the galaxy. Billions of beings watched as a human and a Valthrian, bound together by politics, had risked everything to save people from dozens of different species. But what captured everyone's attention wasn't just their heroism. It was the way Vena held Jake, the naked fear and love in her expression as she healed him. It was the way Jake reached up to touch her face, wiping away her tears even though he was the one who was injured. It was the way they looked at each other, speaking volumes through glances and touches that transcended species and language. A diplomatic marriage arranged for political purposes had become something real, something genuine, something that beings across the galaxy could recognize despite never having seen a human or Valthrian before. Love looked the same no matter what form it took. The footage spread like wildfire. Within hours, every major news network in known space was running the story. By the next day, Jake and Vena had become the most famous couple in the galaxy. Back in their quarters, after Jake had been cleared by medical staff, they sat together on the couch. Jake's side still ached despite Vena's healing, and Vena looked exhausted from the telepathic effort she had expended. "That was stupid," Vena said quietly. "We could have been killed." "But we weren't," Jake replied. "We saved 37 people, Vena. That matters." "You matter more," Vena said, looking at him with those silver eyes. "Jake, when I felt you get shot when I thought I might lose you, I realized something. This bond between us, this marriage, it stopped being about politics a long time ago. I love you, not because we're forced to be together, but because of who you are, because you make me laugh and challenge me and see me as more than just the Empress's daughter." Jake took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I love you too, Vena. I think I have for a while now, but I was scared to say it. Scared that it was just the bond making me feel things that weren't real." "It's real," Vena said firmly. 2 years after their wedding, Jake and Vena stood on the bridge of their new ship, the Covenant. It was a joint Earth-Valthrian design, built specifically for their diplomatic missions. The crew was mixed, humans and Valthrians working side by side, a physical symbol of the alliance that Jake and Vena had helped create. The past 2 years had been extraordinary. After the Vraxan incident, Jake and Vena had become more than diplomats. They had become symbols of what was possible when different species chose to work together. Their story had inspired millions across the galaxy, proof that love and partnership could transcend any boundary. But beyond the public image, their relationship had continued to grow and deepen. The mental bond between them had evolved into something unprecedented. Valthrian scientists who studied them were amazed by what they found. The bond between Jake and Vena was stronger and more complex than any recorded Valthrian bonding. even those between two Valthrians. They theorized it was because of the combination of human emotional intensity and Valthrian telepathic ability. Jake's human capacity for deep feeling had merged with Vena's telepathic nature to create something entirely new. They could now share not just emotions but memories, skills, even physical sensations to some degree. When Jake needed to negotiate in formal Valthrian, he could draw on Vena's knowledge of the language and culture, speaking with a fluency that normally took decades to develop. When Vena wanted to understand the subtle social cues in human interactions, she could access Jake's lifetime of experience. They had become something more than two individuals, a true partnership where the whole was greater than the sum of its parts. Their diplomatic work had been incredibly successful. They had negotiated 7 major trade agreements, prevented 2 potential wars through careful mediation, and established what was now called the Morrison-Vena Protocol, a set of ethical guidelines for interspecies cooperation. Universities across 40 systems taught their methods. Young diplomats studied their techniques, but more importantly, they had changed policy. After their story became public, both the Valthrian Empire and Earth's coalition had established new laws protecting individuals from forced political marriages. What Jake and Vena had endured would never happen to anyone else. Their sacrifice had created a better future for everyone. Jake watched Vena as she reviewed navigation charts with the Covenant's captain, a Valthrian woman named Cirilla. Even after 2 years, seeing Vena still made Jake's heart race a little. She was beautiful, brilliant, and completely his, not because politics had forced them together, but because they had chosen each other every single day since. Through their bond, Vena felt his attention and looked up, silver eyes finding him across the bridge. She smiled. That warm smile she saved just for him, and through their connection, Jake felt her love wash over him like sunlight. "We're approaching the diplomatic station," Captain Cirilla announced. "We'll dock in 20 minutes. Jake and Vena were on their way to meet with the Empress Kerala, Vena's mother. It had been 6 months since they had last seen her, and this visit was important. The Empress had requested a private meeting with them, and neither Jake nor Vena knew exactly what she wanted to discuss. When they arrived at the Empress's private chambers, Kerala was waiting for them. She looked the same as she had 2 years ago, ageless and regal, but her expression was softer than Jake remembered, less cold and more contemplative. "Mother," Vena said, bowing formally. Jake bowed as well, showing respect to his mother-in-law and the ruler of the Valthrian Empire. "Sit, please," Kerala said, gesturing to the comfortable chairs arranged around a low table. "This is a personal visit, not a political one. We can dispense with excessive formality." They sat, and Kerala studied them both for a long moment. Jake felt Vena's uncertainty through their bond and sent her a pulse of support and love. Vena's hand found his, their fingers intertwining naturally. "I have been watching your work together," Kerala finally said. "The negotiations, the treaties, the changes you've inspired across the galaxy. You have exceeded every expectation I had when I arranged this marriage." "Thank you, Your Majesty," Jake said carefully. Kerala held up a hand. "Let me finish. I want to tell you both something, and I want you to understand that it comes from a place of genuine regret." She looked directly at Jake. "When I chose you to marry my daughter, I was thinking only of politics. I needed a human, someone who would cement the alliance between our peoples. I looked at your file and saw someone expendable, a young officer with no powerful family connections, no political influence, someone whose sacrifice wouldn't cause complications." Jake felt Vena's anger spike through their bond, but he squeezed her hand gently, letting her know it was okay. "I am not proud of this," Kerala continued. "I treated you like a resource, a tool to be used for the good of my empire. I gave no thought to what it would mean for you to give up your freedom, your future, your right to choose your own path. I rationalized it by telling myself that sacrifice was necessary for the greater good." The Empress stood and moved to where Jake sat. To his surprise, she knelt before him, placing her hand over her heart in the Valthrian gesture of deepest respect and humility. "I was wrong, Jake Morrison. You were never expendable. You were exactly what my daughter needed, what both our peoples needed, what the galaxy needed. You brought something to this union that no Valthrian could have provided. Your human capacity for growth, for forgiveness, for choosing love even when you had every right to choose anger. These things have changed not just my daughter's life but the course of history. Jake felt his throat tighten with emotion. Your Majesty, you don't need to apologize. What started as a political arrangement became the best thing that ever happened to me. Vena is my partner, my best friend, the person I want to spend the rest of my life with. I can't regret something that brought us together. Kirala stood and Jake saw tears shimmering in her silver eyes, so like her daughter's. You are gracious beyond measure. But I need to say this. Need you both to hear it. I apologize for the pain I caused you. I apologize for taking your choice. And I thank you with everything I am for taking the situation I forced upon you and transforming it into something beautiful. She turned to Vena. And you, my daughter, you have always done your duty, always put others before yourself. But watching you with Jake, I have seen you truly happy for the first time in your life. That is a gift beyond price and one I almost denied you through my rigid thinking about suitable matches. Vena stood and embraced her mother, something Jake had rarely seen her do. It's okay, mother. I understand duty. I understand sacrifice. But you're right. Jake has given me something I never knew I needed. He's given me a partnership where I can be completely myself. When they left the Empress's chambers an hour later, both Jake and Vena felt lighter. The conversation had brought closure to something neither had realized still bothered them. That evening, back aboard the Covenant, Jake and Vena stood in their private quarters, looking out at the stars streaming past as the ship traveled through space. Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if you hadn't been chosen? Vena asked quietly. Jake considered the question. Sometimes. I probably would have finished my military service, maybe moved into a teaching position at the academy. Found someone eventually settled down, had a normal life. Do you wish that had happened? Jake turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. Not for a second. Vena, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. Yes, the way we started wasn't ideal. Yes, having the choice taken from us was wrong. But I wouldn't trade what we have now for anything. Vena pulled him close and Jake wrapped his arms around her waist, holding her tight despite their height difference. Through their bond, their emotions flowed freely. Love so deep it felt like drowning. Gratitude for every moment they had together. Joy at simply being in each other's presence. I used to think the age difference mattered, Vena said softly. That you were too young, that we were too different. But you've taught me that compatibility has nothing to do with how many years someone has lived. It's about how you choose to live those years together. You've taught me that love isn't something that just happens. Jake replied. It's something you build day by day, choice by choice. We were forced to marry, but we chose to love each other. That makes what we have even more meaningful. They stood there for a long time, holding each other, feeling their bond pulse with shared emotion. Outside, the galaxy continued on, billions of beings living their lives. But Jake and Vena had become legends, their story told everywhere from Earth to the furthest reaches of Valthrian space. Parents told their children about the human and the Valthrian who turned a forced marriage into true love. Diplomats studied their methods and tried to replicate their success. Young couples pointed to the stars and said, like Jake and Vena, using their names as a symbol of what partnership should be. But the real story, the one that mattered most, was quieter and more personal. It was two people who had every reason to resent each other, but chose understanding instead. Who had been pushed together by politics but chose to stay together by love. Who proved that even in the cold calculations of interstellar diplomacy,